Welcome to Smart Franchising with FranSmart. I'm Dan Rowe, and I've masterminded the ascent of local favorites to global dominators. This isn't your usual get-to-know-you chat. We're diving deep. We're revealing the raw truths about franchise wealth building. With over 30 years in the trenches, I'm spilling it all. If you have an appetite for unfiltered tales and the hidden blueprints of franchise prosperity, buckle up. We're diving in. All right, welcome back to Smart Franchising with FranSmart, and today we're talking with Ray Harrigill of Sunray Companies, an award-winning franchise operations and development company building high-quality brands in hospitality, retail, and restaurants, and enjoying big success in small markets. So we're going to learn what that's all about. I think we were introduced by Susan Borzo. I think all roads lead to Susan. When I first asked for a recommendation of franchisees that were succeeding by doing well for other people, for their people, she recommended you quickly. So I'm glad we're talking. So thanks a lot, Ray. Thanks for coming on board. And please tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's an honor to be asked. So thank you for your interest and thank you for your interest in our company. We are a multi-unit, multi-concept franchise operations company and development. And that means that we have multiple brands that we own and operate that currently include Palm Beach Tan, My Salon Suite, um, Massage Envy, Holiday Inn Express, Hampton Inns, and just opened a Home 2 Suites last week. So that was a good one to get completed and in service. And that's our current holdings. And we started out originally in the restaurant business as a single unit restaurant owner operator, and grew our portfolio from there. We're also I'm a licensed general contractor. We're in development, but just for ourselves. So we don't build for the general public. It's just our hotel properties, our retail build out, space build out, a strip center, that sort of thing. So that's kind of the breadth of what we do. And a lot of that organization is built around supporting our own units, right? Doing our own maintenance, et cetera. So that's a bit about us.
So you have a lot of franchises right now, but it all started with one somewhere doing something. And didn't you say at one point you were in law school and you got a job working for a restaurant company and then you
Yeah.
split off? But tell us how all
Yeah,
that started.
absolutely. So I started out in college and I got a business degree and then did my MBA and then enrolled for my MBA into law school. And at the time in the late 80s, the dream was to work on Wall Street, and have that MBA JD combination. And so while I was finishing my MBA and starting law school, I met a beautiful young lady who is still my wife, and started talking to her. And suddenly, going up to the East Coast was no longer of interest. I was more interested in staying at home and building a life with her. And I was working in restaurants while I was in school, and her dad, my father-in-law, recruited me to come work for him. And that's how I started working for him actually while I was in law school and then after I finished for a little while. And he was a restaurateur, had some hotels, but that's how I really started out in upper level management. I hit that decision point of, do I practice law or do I go to work with him? And what I knew about him, he was a successful multi-unit franchise operator. And I knew that I would learn how to run businesses, which I didn't get any of that in law school. I didn't get any of that in an MBA or undergraduate business degree. You get all this theory and you know nothing about people. And so what I said in going to work for him, I got my fourth degree, which was a PhD in people and in the restaurant business. So I was running 26 restaurants for him in 3 states. I was traveling all the time. I was all over the place, learned a whole lot. And after a couple of years, I realized that me working for my father-in-law might not be the best decision long term. And while I learned a lot, I think it was better for our family. And so I actually bought a restaurant from him and became a franchisee to his system. He had created his own little franchise, and I
What
was
was it?
his
What was the system?
Bumpers Drive-In,
Oh,
which
okay.
is very similar to Sonic.
Okay.
And so it was a drive-in. So I bought my first restaurant from him, and that's how I started. And
And
that
then
was in
what did
December of 1996.
96? Okay. And then how long did you have that? And then what happened next? How'd you get into another franchise?
So I had the first restaurant in 96. I built a second one in 98. And I had a lot right next door to the second one that I built, and I was fortunate to be able to buy the real estate for the first one and the second one. And I had this extra lot, and I kept looking at it, and I was thinking, what am I gonna? Something needs to happen with this lot next door. And I went to the National Restaurant Show in Chicago, and you know how big it is in McCormick Place. You walk for days and days and days. And they have a few non-food concepts occasionally, but I was walking through McCormick Place and I was cruising along, and I saw a Blockbuster video, and I said, "Oh, that's cool. I really like Blockbuster, but I didn't know if they franchised." I kept walking. I didn't even stop because that's not why I was there. I was getting brochures on grills and fryers and talking to vendors. And so I kept walking. I got back home and I thought, why couldn't there be a Blockbuster right here? And so I called the 1-800 number and got connected to a franchise person and said, "Hey, I'm interested in operating a Blockbuster." And that was the only year that they ever went to the National Restaurant Show. So sometimes fortune smiles on us. But I connected and wound up buying a franchise, not for the lot next door, but for about 5 miles, south of there. And at the time that I got into Blockbuster, it was a huge hit for us because the margins were better than food. It was at the time that we transitioned from VHS to DVD, which means the product cost plummeted and the margin was very high. And that we opened our first one in 2000. So that was from 96, end of 96 when I bought the first one, second business in 98, first Blockbuster in 2000, and continued to grow that and ultimately opened 4 locations. And I would say from a margin and growth perspective, Blockbuster is actually what built our business.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, and also low labor, right? Every time I
Yeah.
think about going into Blockbuster, there's like 2 employees or something.
Oh yeah, it was like 19% all in on labor, and so we were running in a mid to high 30% EBITDA type numbers. So the margin was very very good at that time, but that cash flow is what allowed us to get into other businesses and to get into real estate, and I built a strip center for the first Blockbuster that we did as well. So we were able to acquire some real estate as we kind of went along.
Did you eventually sell off your 4 Blockbusters?
I actually closed them, wrote them down to the end. People are surprised, when I say, well, we got out of the business in 2012. We closed our last unit, which doesn't seem all that long ago. But for us, the way I looked at Blockbuster is I knew that the business was going to evolve. I didn't know it was going to disappear, but I knew it was going to change, and I felt like going with the biggest brand in the business would help us evolve with whatever that was. But what I did do is I kept our debt very, very tight and put everything back into paying all of our Blockbuster debt off that we used to get started. So as we got to the end, I had no debt in Blockbuster.
Hmm.
And as the business was trending down, and our leases came up, we just closed them, or we would go month to month. And then as the business looked not viable, we would close it down and just liquidate our inventory and walk away. And so we exited out of Blockbuster very, very gracefully. Um, and again, sometimes that's luck because if I had leveraged up and bought a lot of locations, it could have been a very different story, which happened to a lot of my friends actually.
Yeah. What was the next business you got into, the next franchise?
The next thing we got into was, if I have the sequence right. So along the way in there, I've done a lot of things that I failed in as well, and I think that's important to talk about the failures because
Yeah.
things don't always go quite as well. So I was the next business that I got into was a medical rehab business doing pulmonary rehab and physical therapy. And it was a CORF, which was a Part A Medicare provider. I was flying somewhere in an airplane, and I looked in the back of a magazine, and it was a full page ad on the back of this magazine that said, CORF, you know, $400,000 in EBITDA, something like that. Big numbers, for that time for sure. And I was like, wow, that's pretty exciting. So I got involved in this medical corp business. Turned out it was an awful business, and it was actually kind of a sham. And the guys that were promoting it wound up going to jail. Actually,
Good. Good.
yeah. But I lost a fortune. So I opened up 2 of those units and totally failed with them. Closed them down and walked away after losing a lot of money. So I got into that. Then so I had a couple of these locations on the Corf. One of them I bought the real estate on. And about that same time, I got a call from a good friend who used to be in franchising with Blockbuster, who had gone to Palm Beach Tan as their director of franchising, really to start their whole franchise program. A guy's name is Steve Berkman. Steve is a great fellow. And he called me and said, "Hey, I've got involved in this new thing." And he said, "I know you're going to think it's crazy, but it's called, Palm Beach Tan." I said, "You left a Fortune 500 company to go to work for a tanning salon." He said, I know, but I'm telling you, I think it's a really good deal." And so Steve flew out to see me, and all of the early guys that got into Palm Beach Tan were all Blockbuster franchisees,
Hmm.
and every one of us. And a lot of the executives were Blockbuster people. So Steve has since retired and left, but the CEO of Palm Beach Tan, Diane Lucas, is a Blockbuster person. Director of franchising is a Blockbuster person. Director of operations is a Blockbuster person. Still today. And there's several of us in the system that are still Blockbuster guys. So I was by far the smallest guy that they got from Blockbuster. Most of the guys they tapped were big guys, and they worked. I was down on the list, but they called me, so that was good. And they called me about taking some of these big markets, which is what some of the early guys were doing. They were taking like Chicago, they were taking, Atlanta, big markets that required a lot of stores. And I just told them at the time, I said, "Look, I've only got, these, 6, 7 businesses open, and I can't afford to go to a market like that. And I also don't know how I'm going to get there to run it."
Hmm.
I said, "But I'll open one at home, because then if I at least can run the business and understand the business, I can manage the business." And they said, "Okay, great." So I opened one in the Jackson, Mississippi metro area, and our first tanning salon was a huge hit. We had people lined up out of the door waiting for 2 or 3 hours to tan. It was somewhat unbelievable. So we had probably, at the time, it was a record opening with the number of tans and activity we were doing. And then we were kind of off to the races. And then we tried to figure out, hey, how do we do a second one, and how do we, grow from there?
So at Palm Beach Tan, the record opening was in Jackson,
Ridgeland,
Mississippi.
Mississippi. Yeah,
In
Ridgeland.
Mississippi. So let's
At least
spend a
the
few.
the activity at that time, the number of tans per day for a new store.
Yeah, but let's talk about that because I think I understand why the sales guy was like, "Hey, go take Chicago," right? I think I understand going after big markets because there's a lot of people there. Let's talk about the value of small markets. Like,
Yeah.
what's so good about it? I mean, you
So
obviously have good sales in small markets.
yeah, we've had that happen a number of times. We're in a tertiary market like us, because we go much smaller than Jackson. That's a pretty big town for some. It's a metro area of 350 or so, but we go to towns that are a lot smaller. And some of these tertiary markets can be quite good. It's harder to predict and model what the volume might be when you're looking at a much bigger system that has bigger system sales and averages. That's kind of the tricky part. What's not tricky is that your occupancy cost is less, your labor costs typically are less, so you're over and your rent's less. So you're in the space for less. So if you can approximate some sort of volume that others would do, your profitability is higher. The risk is you open and there's no volume, or not enough to support what you're trying to do. But we were lucky with Blockbuster that we did decent volume, and it was a lot more than we were doing in the restaurants. Maybe not what the bigger cities were, but we had the same sort of success. Tanning was the same way. And even today, we have some of the higher volume stores in the system. Not the highest, but some of the higher volume stores. So you can build a strong business in a tertiary market, but you have to look at your competition and the offering and what you're doing. And I think that, and the power of the brand, honestly, I think that's a big
So
part of it.
yeah, and then like Massage Envy, I'm in Scottsdale, Phoenix, where they're
Yep.
from. It's a big city. You did just fine in small markets with Massage Envy as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, our AUV for our units is on par with the system. And so we've got some that are higher than the average. We've got some that are a little lower, but we are in line with the system. And we currently have 13 locations in some in towns as small as 45,000 people.
So you're doing the system average volume with lower costs, right? I mean,
Correct.
substantially lower cost.
Yep. And that extra operating margin allows us to reinvest in our people, in our processes, and our systems. So that's been a huge benefit for us.
Let's talk about that because I think that that's something so many franchisors and franchisees get wrong. They spend money on everything other than their people. And at the end of the day, you're not buying yourself a job. You're trying to build a business someday you can sell, right? I always think you
Absolutely.
should staff for the kind of company you're trying to sell or staff for the company that you're trying to build. But like you just said, that we're able to take our extra margin, invest back in the people. That's what Susan mentioned about you. So talk about that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so we are very focused on mentorship, development, training of our people. That is the real asset. The dollars, the asset to open the door are not going to get you a profit, and the space itself, the box is not. The people are, and that's what makes you sustainable, and that's what makes you grow. Now, I will say this, and you mentioned this, is you want to staff for the company you want to be. That's true, but there's a limit to what you can afford regardless of how well capitalized you are, there's a mathematical limit to what makes sense for a particular business at a certain scale or a certain size. And so I always try to be forward thinking about what would I like to have or what do we really need as an organization and how can I afford that person. And so it's kind of like right now with AI where we talk about reducing cost of certain things. We had this conversation in my office yesterday with an AI group and I said, look, we're not trying to eliminate people. We just want to be able to have more capacity because I like the people that are here, in our organization, and I need them. And we work together as a group, and so it's not about eliminating people. It's about being able to do more things with the people that we have and the team that we have. So at the same time, when you're a single unit operator, you can't afford a CPA on staff. You can't afford anybody, as a single unit operator. All you can afford is yourself and go to work every day. So I really value the people that have brought us along the way, and I'm always looking at ways of how we support that and how we're at least covering that position so that whatever they're doing helps pay for themselves. And that gives us more capacity as an organization, but it's the right people at the right time that you can afford.
So what can people learn from that? Like what are some things that you do to get and keep good people longer?
I think the number one thing to remember in most hospitality service based businesses is that unfortunately some of the margin is in our people, and you're hiring people that may not have all the skills in the world, that may not have all the experience, they may not have the degrees, but what they do have is a passion and a desire, in life to grow and be better for themselves, as we all do. So we think our job is to help them grow, and that means mentoring, development, giving them a path of progress. And part of the ethos of our company is we talk about enhancing lives, and we really mean it. And that means enhancing the lives of our coworkers as well as enhancing the lives of our guests, the people that we're serving. If we're doing both of those things, then we grow and get ahead. And it's not about enhancing the company's bottom line, right? That is a result of doing those other things right. Those things happen, and the extra profit that we make allows us to fuel and go back into the investment, kind of the typical flywheel idea that, hey, you're more efficient, you give better service, you make more profit, you put it back into marketing and sales, and you continue to grow. But that's really true, right? That's a theory that comes to life very quickly. It's like if you don't do those things, you're going to lose people again and again and again. So we try to really work hard at taking the people that we have and helping elevate them, pay them more as they grow and they do better, and then they help us and as the company, and it all works together. But that's been our focus, and we've been very fortunate to have a lot of long-term people. One of my directors of operation who runs our retail division started out with us cleaning tanning beds. And today she runs roughly 40 units, has a lot of responsibility, and does a fantastic job for us. And we couldn't be more proud of her, and also proud that we're part of that story. It's her ambition, her hard work that got her where she is. We're happy that we were able to give her a conduit to do that work. So
Well, and that changed the whole trajectory of her life, not just her pay, right? She started
yeah,
off as an hourly and now she's a director. Like you didn't just change her pay, you changed her outlook and the
yeah,
people that are in her family and kids and other people in their family are, looking at their looking at this person's with a different sense of possibilities, right? So
yeah. and and she's helped us too. It's a mutually beneficial relationship, but it's also just one story of many. So we have a lot of success stories like that within our company that we have been able to help give a path forward, right? And when we offer an opportunity for education or taking a class or going to Dale Carnegie or whatever it may be, they're always, yes, I would love to do that. And we love to help them do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so many people get that wrong. They think that the way to make more profit is to tighten the amount of money you put on your people. And they
Yeah.
forget about the hidden cost of turnover, right? Everyone talks about
Yes,
what's my labor number? What's my labor number? And, the hidden cost of turnover and the productivity and just the sort of environment that you have that's in a toxic environment is just, it's awful.
it is. And an old saying, old blockbuster saying that Diane Lucas has a lot is what is measured is managed. And that's true. And so we measure turnover. That's one of our KPIs that we measure corporately to look at. Hey, how are we performing? How are our people treating people? Are we enhancing the lives of these team members or not? And if we see a unit where somebody's constantly churning and their turnover is high, then there's a problem. They lack a skill set, or we haven't developed them properly to help them engage, team members and keep those people. And so when we see a lot of turnover at one unit, it's a red flag for us to say, what's missing here? What are we getting wrong on it?
Yeah. So talk about. I see it. I see a theme with a lot of the businesses that you got involved with: Palm Beach Tan, Blockbuster, My Salon Suites. Those are typically low labor businesses, right? Low number of people to run those.
Sort of. Massage Envy is not. That's the human element in that is very high, and the HR component of that is significant. Um, but some of the others are lower, yes, relatively speaking.
Yeah, and certainly compared to restaurants.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm only new. I've been a restaurant guy for 30 years, and I've only started to look at non-food franchises, and I'm surprised I didn't stumble across that earlier because
Yeah,
there's a lot easier ways to make money. Although I love feeding people, but
yeah.
there's a lot easier ways to make money.
Food is hard that way. And the other thing is, early in my career, I think I failed to value the team members in the same way. I was really old school when I started, and if somebody didn't do right, whatever that means, they were gone. They didn't show up on time, they were gone. And hey, I can get on the grill and I'm better at it than you are. I can get in the kitchen and do anything. I can take an order, I can run it out. Um, and that type of attitude was really self-destructive. And that's the downside of food is that you can run a restaurant with a lot of high intensity and a lot of hours, and you can bridge a lot of gaps, right? You can hide a lot of evil and poor management. And so that's the downside. When you start moving to things that require more skill level, you have to value your people a lot more because you can no longer go do all that, right? Or when you get multiples of something, you can no longer go be that person anymore. And so the first, year or two of restaurants, I worked, very, very hard to do all those things. And I think that's probably stunted me learning better management skills for a little while until I finally woke up and said, hey, I can't do this by myself. I can't run a
Yeah.
single shift by myself. And if I keep losing these people and keep training them again and again, that's not going to move us forward.
Yeah.
So when I realized that was when I think we started making a lot more progress, and I started really thinking more about the process and the system and how we treat people and how they perceive that we treat them, not how I perceive. Right? That's a big part of this is that if you really want to know what's happening in your company, you have to talk to the frontline people if you're going to impact the top line, as they say. So getting down on their level and understanding what's important to them and understanding how they feel about us is really important if we're going to engage them and keep them long term.
Yeah. A lot of people don't want to know the answer to that. How do you feel
They
about
don't.
us? Right.
It's hard. It's hard. It's hard to ask that question. Sometimes it's really hard to hear the answer, to hear that you are not all that you thought you were as an organization, right? Because as an owner, as a CEO, we really try hard and we really care. We don't always appreciate that others don't see us the way that we see ourselves. So stopping and saying, "Hey, how am I really perceived? How are my policies really playing out on people?" You kind of got to know that if you're going to make any changes that mean anything.
Yeah.
So,
Hey, let's talk about some more advantages of small markets because I mean, I one thing that comes to my mind is I've always been in big markets. I grew up in LA, I built my business in DC.
Yep.
So expensive to buy property out there. When I think about how many thousands of franchises that we've impacted and how relatively few investments I have in real estate, I'm embarrassed. And what about the opportunities to own real estate in these small markets for your franchises?
Yeah. Um, Generally available. However, I always say you pick the best location for the business. If you can happen to own the real estate, great, right? But you have to operate a successful business first. So if being in the best power center in town is here and a mile away is something that you could buy that's not as great, I would go with the power center every time. So I'm
Hmm.
going to pick the best location. If I can own the real estate, we do. So most of our retail locations, we don't own the real estate. A few of them we do where we've had the opportunity to either build or buy the center along the way or something. But generally we don't. Most of our real estate comes in through our hotels or if we're going out and buying an office building or something like that we're rehabbing, some strip centers, that sort of thing. So I've tried to be very conscientious about building a cash flow generator but also investing that in real estate, which may not be attached to our businesses, that has its own stream of cash flow and its own stream of revenue. So that's how we've approached it. We are not a real estate development company in the traditional sense that that's where we eat and that's how we make our money and that's what we do. But we use our cash flow from these active businesses to buy assets that we think have a long life and are a good investment.
How does being a general contractor help you run your business, control costs, all that other stuff? What's the upside of being a GC?
Yeah, so I think and sometimes it certainly helps save some costs. That there's some truth to that. Sometimes there's some margin in that in what we do that we can put back as equity in the deal. Like in building a hotel, and we're very transparent with our lenders about what we're doing and how we're doing it. But we may sit down with them on the front end and say, this is the equity we want for building this property, and we want this to be, in the capital stack. And we usually find a bank that will agree with us on that. And if they don't, usually we look for another lender, right? Because it's like, hey, we're a licensed contractor. We have to get paid for our work as well. So that helps a little bit. But I think the most important thing is that it helps us maintain better facilities, helps us run better operations. And really, when there's a crisis, I can have people there immediately. So just a few weeks ago, I guess it was actually 8 weeks ago in New Orleans, we had a car that ran through the front window of a Massage Envy. They missed the curb and the car's in the lobby and hit the front desk. And within 2 hours, I had a full crew of people there removing the glass, redoing the front lobby, and we opened up the next day, and we were fully repaired within 2 weeks, as opposed to closing the business down for 2 or 3 weeks and not being able to make payroll for these guys that are there, et cetera. So it helps us react. The same thing if we have a hurricane or damage to a hotel, we can have a full crew there immediately and get to work. So that's where I think it's helped us be better operators.
Hmm. How about this one? You've been at this business as long as I have. How, like, everything that you've learned, like, how could you have done things better from the beginning? How could you be more successful if you had to do it all over again?
It's a good question. I'm not unhappy with where we are by any stretch of the imagination. What's good about where we are is we did not raise equity from other people. We did this out of our retained earnings and we did it out of debt. And so I don't have a lot of partners. Um, had we done that, we could have grown a lot faster, right? If we had borrowed other people's money, but equity is the most expensive way to fund your business, giving up the equity. So we didn't do that. So we're at a size where I'm happy with it. What I could have done better along the way, certainly in the early days, was be a little more patient. I was a pretty impatient person and hard driving to get things done, and could be pretty not by on purpose, but the pace of that can be brutal on your team sometimes. So I think being more patient would have been helpful. I think really embracing and understanding the development of processes and systems and also systems for our people would have helped accelerate us faster. So I know that's the right answer in hindsight. I don't know that at the time when it was just me, that it would have been any different, right? Administratively, gosh, I had 6 businesses open and I had no back office.
Hmm.
So I had 6 units open, and at night I'm at home on the counter in those days, writing out checks by hand, and then I'm doing payroll on QuickBooks, and I'm running my own P&Ls, and I'm doing my own tax filings, and I had the educational pieces for a lot of that stuff, but I was doing all that myself because I couldn't afford anybody. So there's only so much you can do with the people you have, but as you grow, really focusing on that and reinvesting more of those dollars into the process, the systems, and the people would have accelerated us even faster than where we are today.
How's the business gotten tougher in the 30 years, and how do you
Mm.
pivot so that you're still handling it?
Yeah, great question. You just picked one of my favorite words, which is pivot, and that's we actually our pinnacle award in our company is the pivot award. Um, no business works out based on a pro forma. No, no business ever works out the way that you plan. It is always something different than what you thought when you started. And the ability to pivot and embrace change and manage change is, I think, the mark of a successful operator. When you can't do that and you throw up your hands, you're kind of cooked. You're done. So being able to pivot is everything. Um, I think, difficulty wise, I don't think things are any harder today than they were 30 years ago. They're just different. And I tell my team that all the time. I said, look, there's plenty of people starting a business right now who are going to be wildly successful. And they're in the exact same environment we find ourselves in today. So when we keep looking back and talking about how great it was, 20 years ago, then we're really handicapping ourselves from being successful and taking advantage of the opportunities that we're presented with today. And as I've gotten older, I have to remind myself of that a bit more, with a new generation of worker, the way that they think. And our job is to meet their expectations where they are, not where we think they ought to be, right? And so going out and recruiting new people and getting them excited about what we're doing and having the right opportunity and the right benefits for them as they're looking for today is the important part. So I think the hardest part for me today is continuing to reinvent myself and remind myself that that's who I'm serving, that's who I'm working for and with, or the new line level people that are available today. And the same thing goes for guests, right? We have to satisfy guests with how they want to be engaged today, and how they respond on social media and how we respond to them. Those are the pieces that matter today. So I think evolving to a constantly changing environment is really important. And when I was in business school, this goes way back, there was a book called When Giants Learn to Dance by Rosabeth Moss Cantor, who is a Harvard professor. And that was kind of the point then, was how do these big companies turn and adapt to new and different things? And most of them can't because they're too big, right? But small companies, we certainly should be able to do that. But it always reminded me, learning something theoretical and applying it as you go, is we have to continue to learn how to dance and to pivot.
I like what you said a second ago about we have to change the way we're serving them, meaning your employees. And obviously, you got your ego in check because so many people have it the other way and think that the employees are there for us.
Yeah. Well, that's true. But I mean, what a gift to be able to sit here and talk to you today about business in general. And I've got other people that are out, serving guests and taking care of people. That's a privilege, and I certainly don't take that for granted.
Yeah. And you're a humble guy, no doubt about it. But we're here to help people. Why do you think back of some examples of the brands that you're a franchisee of? Obviously, there's a spectrum. Some people are really successful, some people are struggling in the same exact system. Why do you
Yeah.
think that is? And what are some examples?
I think some people get into business and they're undercapitalized. That happens a lot because they stretch to get there in the first place, right? And so they're really fighting every penny to try to eat, right? To cover their own bills and then still pay their people and satisfy vendors and then have enough left for a little extra marketing, to grow the business. So I think that's one. I think they get into they're undercapitalized. Number two, I see a lot of times with operators that get into franchises, they are inexperienced managers and their skill level is maybe a little lacking, right? Based on their background of whatever it was they did before. Perhaps they were managing in corporate America. They were managing a department or working for a company and maybe as a salesperson, and they didn't really manage anybody, right? But they made pretty good money enough to start a franchise. And they get into this and they really don't have the people skill yet. And they have to learn that, right? And so that's what you typically see is they may learn how to run one unit and do that fairly well, but they can't figure out how to get to the next level to open the second one. Some of that's just enough margin to be able to eat, right? How do you reinvest in one, but I still need to draw a paycheck? It gets really hard to do that. The second thing that happens when they open that second and third unit, or even when they grow the volume at one location and have more people, is they don't know how to deal with all of the people and the new job that they just got. Because running a one unit is not what a multi-unit person does. It's a very different job. So learning to a multi-unit operator job is different from what they started with. And so you see that a lot where guys open maybe 2, 3 units and they can't get past that point because they can't really master or do well with the multi-unit position and then grow to the next level, right? And then become a regional person where they're operating, or they have two district managers under them. Again, it's a different job. And I think that goes back to just reinventing yourself in your career as you go. And for me personally, having different levels of responsibility along the way and then entering new brands is always very exciting for me. I always enjoy learning a new system, learning the new KPIs, learning the new, triggers of what to talk about and what to think about and how does this business work. So that has reinvigorated me and has reinvented me along the way.
Nate, when you mentioned undercapitalized, and that just triggered a thought in me. I've seen so many people that actually qualify for the franchise. They have the money to qualify for what the unit level requirements are. They wind up overstretching themselves, buying huge territories,
Yeah.
and and how many humongous, very successful franchisees that build big franchise companies that start with one. Like, you can become a really big franchisee. You don't have to start off day one buying a huge territory. You open successfully, grow out of cash flow. You might start growing also taking over struggling franchisees who either
Hmm.
aren't following the systems or don't have the people skills, or unfortunately got themselves in financial problem. But I mean, talk more about, like, just give somebody some assurance. Like, you can build a huge business. You don't have to start off day one buying a humongous territory.
Yeah, that's a good point. And there's a pro and a con to both of that. And I think number one, know your franchisor, know their philosophy, and kind of go meet them and talk to them and go to their home office and get a sense of who they are and how they treat franchisees. That's really, really important. Just like any regular business owner, some franchisors are better than others, right? Who have the right business philosophy, who have the right idea of partnership, who will help you. So I've been fortunate to be involved with some very good franchisors that value the relationship, that are trying to help you be successful and not just sell units.
Hmm.
On the other hand, I've certainly encountered groups that just want to sell a franchise and at all cost, and they give you no real protection. Their documents are only to their favor, not to that of the franchisee as well. And they approach it from a very hard standpoint. It's like, yes, we will give you a protected area of 10 square feet outside of your store. This is your
Thank you.
protected
Thank you.
area. Yes. Right. As opposed to somebody that says, hey, yeah, look, why don't we pull out a map? Why don't you draw out your area of protection, right? Or hey, you've got a 1 mile, or you've got a 5 mile. I mean, I literally have had franchisors that say, hey, here's the map, draw it out. You tell me what protection you want. It's like great, So you start with people with the right attitude of we want to help you grow. We would rather have a smaller number of franchisees with multiple units. That's another way. Sometimes you'll get a group like that. Or on the other hand, sometimes you get a a system who sells a lot of units to 1 and 2 unit owners. And usually that's a very fragmented system. And I say a not a very professional system of operators because they just don't have the experience to do that. But it goes back to the same problem of, hey, if they're selling to multi-unit folks, they're going to grow a little more slowly than if they're selling just to anybody that'll buy a franchise. So understanding that about a franchisor is important.
Okay. Let's go back to small markets, some of the smaller markets. Is there any other pluses or minuses about being in small markets? Like as you go
Yeah,
around the country, could you go to an entirely new state and instead of going to Chicago, go 50, 60 miles outside of Chicago and
that the downside is again that the concept may exhaust the population very quickly, right? And you just can't do enough volume. So, absolutely, there are places that I would never go with a Palm Beach tan or a Massage Envy or a My Salon because it's just too small, you know. So, a town of let's say 10,000 people is not going to support a Palm Beach tan. It's just not. It's just not enough tanners in that number of population to
mm,
support a professionally run tanning salon with the amount of equipment that we buy and purchase and do. So that would never work. On the other hand, I can go to that same market and put a hotel in and do just fine, which is a much bigger asset,
hmm
right? And builds much more wealth over time. But I can go have a very successful Hampton Inn in a town of 10 or 12,000 people. So it goes back to serving the needs of that community, of matching up, is there a demand for the product that makes sense, and trying to figure out if you're going to have enough demand to make it work is the short of it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So no, I got it, but it's tempting because the costs are so high in the big cities, New
Yeah,
York, DC. I mean, forget even being able to find property that you could buy.
yeah.
So, I mean, it's tempting. Hey, last thing. So everything that you've seen, as long as you've been in the business, how things change, knowing what you know now, you gave really good feedback about the employees a second ago, meeting the new generation of employees where they are. Somebody coming to you saying, I'm thinking about getting into franchising. What does the next 10 years look like? How would someone position themselves for success today for the next 10 years?
The first thing is selecting the right business and the right franchise based on the market that you see. And that's hard. There's some art that goes to that. Every business has a cycle. Things that are popular today may not be popular 10 years from now, 15 years, 20, 30, 40, 50. There's no forever business that I've seen really. Very few 50-year businesses. So trying to pick something that is on an uptick, um, trying to pick something that is meeting a current demand is really important. That's relevant. Trying to pick a strong franchisor and a strong franchise system is important. And I think learning how to underwrite that is important. For instance, looking at AUV, looking at the number of units they have open, looking at the general cash flow and the success of their franchisees. Kind of the way I look at it when I underwrite something is look, if I can do decent numbers on average, then if it meets my criteria at average, then I'm excited about that. But if it has to be the highest level store that's in the FDD, then that's a problem, right? Because I'm not so arrogant to think that I'm going to be in the top tier every time with every store. At best, I'm going to be average, right? And back to like Massage Envy we talked about. At best, I'm average on the system. So I'm exactly average. And so the average numbers worked for me, and that made sense. So I think figuring out what the right concept is on the front end is really, really important. I think making sure you're passionate about that business is important. This is a long haul, and you have to like to serve people or not. If you don't like people and you don't like serving people, do not get in the service industry, right? If you don't actually enjoy standing at the counter and talking to a customer and serving somebody, then don't get in this business. Do a different business. Go do auto repair or whatever. Something that's not customer facing or business to business or something. So I think matching yourself up with the right business is really really important because your enthusiasm and your willingness to work the business every day is really important. And the other piece of that is I would encourage any potential franchisee to understand what the physical work of that business actually means. Too many people get into a business and think, oh, I'm going to be a business owner and be able to go on trips and, I'm going to own a business. And they don't realize that, yeah, you own the business and you're going to be working in the business for a very long time. Even if you're extraordinarily well capitalized, you can't run the business from a desk in an office somewhere. You have to be an owner operator to start anything, and you have to enjoy it, and you have to be willing to put in whatever hours it takes. And I know, as you said, from your background as a restaurateur, I was actually talking to somebody this past weekend about this, and some people think I'm joking, but it's look, for the first 9 years, from '96, for 9 years I worked 7 days a week, open to close. And people think oh yeah, yeah, open to close, yeah, yeah. It's like, no, I worked open to close 7 days a week for 9 years, and I maybe took a handful of days off in that time period. I took no vacations. I didn't do anything except going in every day or going unit to unit and talking to people, and trying to keep our costs down, and trying to pay the bills, and move things ahead, and pay all this debt, all this money I'd borrowed and promised bankers I was going to pay back. So it was 9 years of just killing it. And then I started taking one day off. And then I was working 6 days. Right. And so not everybody has to maybe have that level of commitment, but it was the only way that I knew how to do it. And I had a lot of education, and I'd saved some money when I started. So I didn't go in, necessarily undercapitalized, but I had everything I had in it. I didn't have anything left. That was for sure. And I had no choice but to work it like there was no other option. And so I think it's really important for franchisees to understand that. And I talk to a lot of young people that talk about, oh, yeah, I want to do what you're doing. They may want to have the end road. They may want to have the result, but do they really want to do what I did to get there? And that's a harder question. That's a personal answer. And most people will tell you, oh, yeah, I can do that. I don't mind working, 60 hours a week. And it's like, I'm not talking about 60 hours a week. I'm talking about 100 hours a week.
Yeah.
Because when the person walks out the door, when your manager, kind of tosses the keys on the desk, tag, you're it. And it really doesn't matter what you had planned or what you thought. The business has to be served. Your team members have to be served. The guest has to be served. And somebody's got to be willing to step in and bridge the gap until you can figure it out. So.
Yeah, and even when you're not working, even after hours, like your brain doesn't turn off. You're constantly thinking about the business and what happens at this scenario and what could go wrong and the fear of the monster of this and that. And it's
Absolutely.
crazy. Ray, what do you tell somebody thinking about buying a franchise who's looking at advertisements talking about how passive franchise ownership is and how franchises are like ATM machines?
I would tell them run, don't walk.
Run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Run, don't walk from that franchisor. I haven't seen one yet that's truly like that. I've seen some that are quasi, passive in a way. But the margin's usually not there either. I mean, your margin is in your effort. The margin is in what you're bringing to the table, and you're helping provide and holding things together. That's the value add of the whole thing, is that you're in there every day, creating something new and different.
Well, great, Ray. Susan was right. You're the man. Thank you very much. I appreciate all your insight and wisdom, and very generous of you to share your story. Where can people find out more about you? Do you have a website?
Our website is www.sunrayms.com. So it's like Sunray, Mississippi. Log on and check it out.
I know where Ray comes from, but what's Sunray? Where did you come up with the name?
It's a good question. Originally, my brother-in-law, his name is Sonny, he was going to join in with me on the first business. And so I went and I formed the company name. And the next day he said, no, I don't want to do it. I'm out. So I'd already spent the money forming the name. So Sunray just kind of stuck. So awesome. That was it.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Yeah. Go to sunrayms.com for more info on Ray. And I look forward to watching the next several years, like the next several decades, to see how you keep at it. Cause I mean, I don't know about you. I'm never going to retire. I'm going to keep going.
We're the same way. Absolutely.
All right, my friend. Well, good to see you. And I'll talk to you soon.
Have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to Smart Franchising with FranSmart. I'm your host, Dan Rowe. If you enjoyed today's episode, this podcast is only going to get better. Please like, comment, and subscribe to hear more from the most successful franchisors and franchisees, and we'll see you next time.